Hello, buddy. Welcome back to Tin Man Sport Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'll be reacting to my second scary storyteller channel. And this was Dark Reality, and the video that I picked out to watch is Three Scary True Airbnb horror stories. So without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights back off, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road and in the bag, shall we? Okay, here we go.
When I was 25, I made the biggest decision of my life, to move across the country to attend grad school. Life on the East Coast hadn't been great since I finished undergrad. I was working two dead-end jobs, in a toxic relationship, and feeling generally depressed after 4 amazing years of college.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. Not everybody can live a normal life with a perfect, stable relationship and not so hard working job. But sometimes you have to work your way out of those places in life. But I know once you find a better job, you will feel better about yourself. But anyway, let's just see what this person does in the story, shall we?
I meticulously planned the trip weeks before my departure. Opting for a route through the middle of the country, I would pass through states like Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. Since I didn't have a specific deadline to arrive, I decided to drive 10 to 15 hours per day and find accommodations wherever I ended up. Instead of expensive hotel rooms, I opted for cheap Airbnb rentals. I actually prefer the homely feel of Airbnb over hotels. The first day of driving was the longest, lasting 14 hours until I reached Nashville. After checking into my rental, I enjoyed some barbecue and fell asleep while watching Breaking Bad. Early the next morning, I hit the road again. I can't stress enough how liberating it feels to drive cross-country. After driving for about 12 hours, I began feeling the stress of being behind the wheel for so long. I stopped for a coffee and to book my next stay. Although Oklahoma City, which was about an hour east, offered more options, I felt myself nodding off and decided to find something closer for safety.
Yeah, you might want to do that because once you start nodding off, you never know, you might accidentally drive off the road. Find something that's quickly nearby, book it, pull in, and rest, and continue the journey the next day.
As I scrolled through the app, I came across an entire cabin for $60 a night. The caption read, "Bob's Mountain Getaway." The cabin itself appeared simple, with aluminum siding and a sheet metal roof. Luxury wasn't a priority since I only needed a place to sleep. However, something felt off as I read through the description. The poster seemed to be trying too hard to make it sound like a resort. The thought of those stories about people getting murdered in cabins in the woods crossed my mind. Perhaps I had seen too many documentaries and movies about killers. So I chose to drive to OKC and stay at a place that seemed safer. The rest of my trip went smoothly. I was in awe of the rocky and non-green landscape of the western mountains, which I had never seen before.
I know, I would love to see that too because it don't look like it's been torn up as much like the mountains over here has, but I know those views will be breathtaking.
Fast forward 2 years later, I had completed grad school, secured a good job, and was in a healthy relationship. I was listening to a true crime podcast called The Last Podcast on the Left. In one of their segments about strange happenings, they read a news story titled The Eunuch Makers. It involved two men who rented a cabin on an LGBTQ app similar to Airbnb and offered gender reassignment surgeries. These men weren't doctors or even college educated, and they were eventually caught when one of their patients ended up in the ER due to a botched surgery. Intrigued, I decided to Google the story and began scrolling down. Eventually, I came across a picture of the cabin. It looked oddly familiar, and it took me a moment to realize why. It was the same cabin I had seen on Airbnb 2 years earlier. I searched through my phone to confirm because I remembered taking a screenshot of it due to its creepy appearance. What made the situation even more terrifying was that these individuals were keeping the body parts from the surgeries in jars. They would grind them up to make sausages and other dishes.
Oh man, that makes me sick in my stomach. Talk about cannibals right there. Makes you think that you're glad that you didn't, or aren't you glad that you did not book this place? They probably would have done something to you.
While I'm sure no harm would have come to me if I had stayed there, the thought of what was happening in the same place where I almost slept sent shivers down my spine. So take it from me, if you're ever unsure about an area, always prioritize your safety and spend the extra money.
Oh, absolutely. Do the research of that area, and if it's known to be a crime scene area where cannibal people are literally taking body parts and grind them up, then check for another place. That is disturbing to find out. So let's get to story number 2.
I am traveling around the country in my car. I have been driving for over a week from the city where I lived and have been sleeping in my car to save money. It wasn't until I reached a big enough city that I decided to treat myself to a comfortable bed. I chose Airbnb because it is cheaper than hotels. I booked an Airbnb the day before I arrived in the city, so there weren't many options left. I found an apartment on Airbnb that looked very new and modern, and it was in a great location. The price was decent for its location, and it almost seemed too good to be true. The only downside was that it was listed as a new listing with no reviews. However, I thought the low price was because it was a new listing and decided to give it a try. After all, it's Airbnb, so it must be legit, right? When I arrived at the apartment building, it looked older than I had expected. Later, I realized that my Airbnb was likely the only renovated apartment in the building, which seemed to be in poor condition. It looked more like a dorm hall than an apartment building. Nevertheless, I let it slide because I didn't pay too much, and the apartment itself looked like the pictures, so that was good enough.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If it just looks like the pictures, then you know you ain't being scammed, because if you walked into a place that didn't look like it did on the photos, I would have been walking right out. But this is a new listing. I figure they're trying to get some people to rent out the apartments that are already fixed just so they can get more revenue in to finish the rest of the building. But just be alert on any suspicious activity in that place.
Everything went well for the first 2 days. As a female traveling alone, I always prioritize safety. I don't go out when it's dark, and I always lock the door, using every single lock, including the chain. On the third day, I was out all morning and came back to the apartment to change before heading to the beach. Again, I locked the door, including the chain. I was in front of the door, watching TV while changing when suddenly the door unlocked and someone opened it. I was extremely lucky that I had put the chain lock on the door. Otherwise, it would have opened completely. I was naked, and no one else was supposed to have the keys. My immediate reaction was, "Excuse me?" And I quickly closed the door, locking it again. I came from the back of the door and didn't see who was opening it. I sat in front of the door, scared and shocked, realizing that this person could potentially still enter since they had the keys to the apartment. At first, I thought maybe it was the owner returning after I checked out, but that wasn't possible as I wasn't supposed to check out until the following day, so it couldn't be the owner. After crying for a few minutes, I gathered myself and called the owner to explain what had happened. She assured me that no one else should have a set of keys other than her and me, and she was at work at the time, so it couldn't have been her. I was scared to stay in the apartment because someone could come in, but I didn't want to leave because all my valuables were there. It was a lose-lose situation. I decided to call my dad, who told me that it was not okay for someone else to have the keys and that the owner needed to address the situation immediately. He talked to her, and she assured me that she would come shortly with a locksmith to change the locks and give me a new set of keys. She then explained that she had only owned the apartment for 6 months, and that before my stay, there had been only one other Airbnb booking. She mentioned that the apartment had been sitting empty, except for those 2 bookings, because she had been renovating it, which now explained why the building looked run down and didn't match the apartment. She speculated that the only possibility for who could have had the keys was the previous owners or someone related to them, which seemed illegal.
Yes, because you would think that they would have handed over the keys to the new owner and nobody should be going back in there. But yeah, the dad is right. Get the new Airbnb host to address the issue and get a locksmith to change out the locks, because then these people won't be able to turn their keys into the lock and break into that place ever again.
This possibility and theory really messed with my mind. How was it possible that I was gone all day, every day, and the moment I was home, during the daytime, someone tried to come in? Did they know I was there? What were they trying to do? If the apartment had been vacant for 6 months, maybe this happened frequently? Or maybe they saw me enter and attempted to do something to me. These questions constantly haunted my mind. I am just grateful that I had put the chain lock on the door. Otherwise, I don't even want to imagine what could have happened. Needless to say, I won't be leaving a positive review, and I won't be staying in an Airbnb with no reviews or one that seems too good to be true.
That will be kind of scary, just to think that you went out for work and was out all day, and then when you come back, Someone literally tried to open up the door, but thankfully you had the chain lock on it. But the Airbnb host should have already had the locks changed before they had guests come over, so they wouldn't have to deal with people trying to get in to people's apartments with the old keys. Do like this person says, always check on Airbnb for more star reviewed Airbnb rentals, because 2 or 1 star bad reviews will not do it for me. Find the best one possible with a good price and avoid all this.
I spent a year studying in Mexico recently, and as you do on exchange, I tried to travel as much as I could. Between the semesters, there is a big break, and my buddy, with whom I spent most of the time during the exchange, and I decided to go on a longer backpacking trip through Mexico together. We had a rough plan on where to go and what we wanted to see, but we hadn't even booked our flight back yet, nor were we sure from where we would take it from. We wanted to keep it flexible. We had an amazing time, and a few days before our trip ended, we finally decided to take our flight from a nearby city that had really cheap flights, but the city itself didn't really have much to offer. Then, on Airbnb, we found a room very close to the airport in a house with a pool, and we thought we'd treat ourselves to a relaxed pool day at the end of the trip. The host turned out to be a family, with the husband being Mexican and the wife being from Europe. She could even speak our native language, so we arranged that we would take a bus to the airport and they would pick us up from there. When we finally arrived in the city, it was already dark, and the bus driver refused to drive us to the airport since it was not directly on his route. He dropped us off on the highway, which was already a pretty shitty situation. We were standing with our backpacks on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere in a not so safe city in Mexico.
Oh, I'll be flipping out if the bus driver refused to take us to the airport. Be like, I don't care if it's on your route, but you got paying passengers that need to go there. Because that's ridiculous that they would just drop them off on the highway right here.
However, I called the hosts, sent them our GPS location, and they said no problem. They would come and get us. So the husband came to pick us up, and it was a very uncomfortable situation getting into the car with a stranger at night in the middle of nowhere. It didn't help that the guy looked like Danny Trejo without a mustache. As I tried to make small talk with him, he only gave monosyllabic answers or straight out ignored me. I thought he just wasn't a big talker and hoped we would arrive soon. Looking back, I can see a million red flags, but at that time, we just didn't see them. Either we were too tired or, to be honest, we didn't really have any other choice but to go along anyway. We arrived, and that should have immediately set off alarms. We were in the middle of nowhere. There were fields with sheep and goats around, and suddenly a gravel road branched off from the paved road. Along that gravel road there were about 6 huge mansions, all with 2-meter walls, topped with NATO fence, huge gates, and at least 2 gigantic guard dogs per house. When we entered the house, we were greeted by the wife, a bubbly middle-aged woman who was very talkative but pleasant. She had actually cooked dinner for us, and we ate while exchanging small talk. The husband just sat at the table, not saying a single word. After dinner, we more or less went directly to bed because it had gotten late, and we were tired from a long day. The next morning, we saw that the weather was not that good, so we decided to go into town and see the few touristy things it had to offer instead of spending time at the pool. When we came back, it was already dark, but we decided to jump into the pool anyway to cool off because it was very hot and humid. The wife joined us, and at some point my friend made the mistake of asking how they were able to afford such a house. It didn't really match the price range of the jobs they were telling us they were doing. She deflected a bit and added that her husband was very handy because he had grown up on the streets and basically built the house himself. We realized it may not have been the best topic and broke off the conversation.
Yeah, that's a little bit sketchy right there. It will take a guy years to build something elegant with a pool, like what they're describing. I guarantee you that these people are either con artists or thieves and just hid out there and bought that property and got the house built there. I don't know, but I've been trying to find any sign to pack up and get out of there quick.
That was the last day of our trip, and we had our flight back home early the next morning. We still had some weed left that we had bought on the trip, and we thought it would be nice to smoke one since it was our last night. But as this was a family home, and they had kids around, we thought it would be better to speak to our hosts if they would mind. Later in the evening, we asked the wife if it would be okay if we smoked on the terrace. She found it quite amusing and started laughing. She shouted to her husband, who was lying on the couch watching TV, "My love, The boys ask if it would be okay if they smoke some weed. What do you think? He just laughed, but didn't give an answer. We looked at her with a dumbfounded expression, and she told us, "Sure, just go ahead." So we went to the terrace and started smoking our joint. Later, they joined us, and we just had a chat. And this is where things got really messed up. For some reason, they started asking all sorts of questions about the weed: where we got it, how much it was, who we got it from, and how much we would have to pay for it back in Europe. They seemed way too interested in the weed, and at one point, the wife casually revealed to us, "Yes, we thought about doing that as a source of income, selling weed. But too many people die doing that because the cartels don't like it. Actually, my husband used to kill people for doing that." I immediately felt sober. Did she just say, and as if he read my mind, her husband added, "Yes, when I was about 16, I killed a lot of people for the cartel for money." He said it in a tone as if he just said he used to mow lawns when he was a teenager.
But it ain't the same thing. That's how he made his money. At this point, I would feel so nauseated feeling knowing that you're in the house of a former cartel member. I'll be packing my stuff up and getting on the next flight out of there ASAP.
I still thought I must have misunderstood, so I texted my friend, who was sitting across the table from me, trying not to make eye contact because I knew we would freak each other out. He confirmed that I had indeed understood correctly. We discussed what we should do and agreed that there was no immediate threat, and that we should just stay since we didn't have anywhere else to go, and it was already late. But things got even crazier. We tried to keep our composure and continue making conversation with our hosts. A few minutes later, though, the husband got up and went inside to get something. He came back with a literal kilo of weed pressed into a brick. He proceeded to break bits off the brick and roll them into a joint that would probably have knocked out Snoop Dogg. It was about the size of my thumb, and I guess it had about 2 grams of weed in there. Of course, he offered the joint to us, but we politely declined, saying that we were already pretty stoned. He seemed a little offended, but fortunately, he bought our excuse. However, it got even worse. A few minutes later, we heard a couple of loud bangs. The wife became uneasy and asked, "What was that?" He answered calmly, 9 millimeters, confirming my suspicion that those were indeed shots. It was around 7 or something shots, fired pretty quickly after each other. The wife got nervous and asked if we should maybe go inside and questioned what they were shooting at. In the air, at cows, at people. He just shrugged it off, and we stayed outside. Again, a few minutes later, there were more shots, this time even closer. The wife became even more upset and asked again, "Should we maybe go inside? What do you think they are shooting at? Should we go inside?" And I think I will never forget when he answered in the calmest way imaginable, "No, everything's okay. I didn't hear any screams yet." I don't know why, but the way he calmly said that freaked me out, and it still makes my heart beat faster whenever I think about it. After that, we quickly excused ourselves and went to our room. When we finally could talk, we basically lost it and panicked. What the hell were we supposed to do? We were locked in a house with a contract killer in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and people were shooting outside. We decided it was probably our best bet to stay because we thought, well, we are his guests. He is not going to harm us, hopefully. And it's better to have walls, dogs, and a serial killer between us and people shooting around.
I mean, even though that sounds bad, I do agree with that. Because if you just walk out now, you probably would have got shot. And plus, that guy might have some guns on the property that he can protect you and his family with, even though that is kind of creepy.
So we barricaded ourselves in the room and didn't sleep a second until the morning when we noped the hell out of there and went to the airport. I have never been so happy to be patted down at security in my whole life.
Now they know not to book them for another Airbnb stay while in Mexico. Golly, that would be crazy to experience, knowing that you're staying in a house with a cartel assassin. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more dark reality content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man Score channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and that's a wrap, and that's day, y'all.